Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. Have you ever seen people make beautiful resin castings in round cake moulds and wondered to yourself, that's beautiful, but how are you going to display it because you can't stand it up? Well, I've thought that many times. I've always thought it's such a shame that you can't display it properly. And so today I'm experimenting with adapting a round cake mould so that it has a flat bottom, and then I can use it for all kinds of things. In fact, today I'm going to be using my adapted mould to make a mantle clock. So if you like the idea of that, stay tuned and enjoy the video. Okay, let's get started. Here's my silicone cake mould. It's a nice shiny one, which is good. You want one with a shiny surface on the inside. It's about 7.5 inches wide and 5 centimetres deep. And I've got some thick cardboard there. It's mounting board that you get for framing pictures. I cut the card to the size that I wanted it, and as you can see, mine's going to fit quite high up. You could make your piece smaller and just have a bigger mould and a smaller flat bottom, if you get what I mean. It doesn't need to be as big as mine. It depends on what kind of shape you're looking for. But I noticed that the sides of my mould, although they looked like they were vertical, they weren't vertical. They had a slight slope. So I had to keep adapting that piece of cardboard and until it would fit, sloping the sides, just cutting them and testing it against the mould to see if it would fit snugly. And so I don't know what the exact angle was, but I just kept going back to it and checking that it would fit nicely. Once I'd got that piece the right size, I needed to make sure it was non-porous because there was going to be silicone poured against it. So I used some Shiny Shield glossy release film, which is adhesive on the back, and I covered it with that. If you don't have that, you can just use sticky back plastic. It's fine. It's just anything to stop the silicone from soaking into the card so that it can be easily removed afterwards. And this glossy release film is really good. It's from Resin Pro, and you can use it for all kinds of things, not just what I'm doing today. It can be used against resin, and it comes off really easily if you use it as a barrier. Okay, so the barrier is ready and now it needs to be stuck into place inside the cake mould. So I thought about what I could use to stick the barrier into position, something that would stop the silicone from leaking through but would also come off easily without damaging the silicone mould. And I ended up deciding to use duct tape, and this is actually the Duck brand, so duct tape you might want to call it, and it did actually work really well. I was really pleased, and obviously it didn't stick, it didn't bond to the silicone because nothing does bond to silicone apart from silicone, but it formed a seal and it came off really easily afterwards, so it was perfect for the job. I added a strip to the bottom and attached it and smoothed it all down, and then I did the sides. And really you just need to keep adding lots of little bits because it's a bit fiddly, and just keep adding bits until you can see that there's no spaces for the silicone to get through. You need it to be completely sealed. Now it's time for the silicone. I'm using Pure Mould from Resin Pro, and it's a 2-part moulding compound, and it's 1:1 by weight. So all you have to do is weigh out equal parts of A and B and mix it up. And I didn't know exactly how much I would need. It was a guess, and I guessed almost right. I was slightly under, which was good. I prefer to be slightly under than over because I don't like to waste anything. So yeah, I measured some out and mixed it all up. So equal, like I said before, equal parts A and B. When I poured in my B, I actually went 10 grams over. I slipped. So yeah, I went 10 grams over. So I got my A back and put in an extra 10. So it's easily sorted if you do go a little bit wrong like I did. Once I'd measured it, I gave it a really good stir because you can't tell by looking at it when it's fully mixed because both parts are the same colour. With some silicone mould making solutions, you get one part that's a colour and the other part isn't, and then you can tell really easily if it's completely mixed. But when both parts are clear, it's a bit trickier, so you've just got to mix and mix and mix just to make extra sure that it's mixed. And I think I just broke a record for how many times you can say mixed in one sentence, so yay! Okay, so once it's completely mixed, just pour it in all the way up to the top of the barrier and cross your fingers that, it's not going to leak. And yeah, I did cross my fingers because I've made quite a lot of moulds now and usually that stuff manages to find a way out. But actually, using that duct tape, it didn't. It worked really well and I'm definitely going to use that duct tape again. So yeah, that was a success. And as you can see, I didn't quite make enough silicone, so I just did a little bit extra and topped it up. And then once that's filled, you need to leave it about a day until it's ready. In fact, it's best to leave it a little bit longer if possible, and you'll find out why later on. Now, this is where it nearly went completely wrong. Watch carefully, you'll see what happened. And it was my own silly fault. I don't know what I was thinking. Are you watching? There it goes. It nearly collapsed from the weight of the silicone. That duct tape wasn't strong enough to hold it up. But luckily, I had my pot of my moulding solution on hand to put there to stop the barrier from falling down. So it's good that I made that mistake so you don't have to. I'm always doing that, making mistakes on your behalf. Yeah, that could have been really bad if I hadn't caught it. Right, it's actually 2 days later because whilst it was curing, I had the idea to make a clock and I had to wait for the clock mechanism to arrive. So I wasn't in any rush to get to the next step. So this had a nice long time to cure, which is always best. The longer you can leave it, the better. So I'm just removing the duct tape and then I'll remove the barrier. And you see how easy it comes off. It came off so nicely. I was really pleased about that. Now, I wasn't completely sure if the silicone would bond to the silicone cake mould because sometimes different kinds of silicone don't bond to each other. And I didn't actually try to find out because I thought I'd rather, even if that silicone will come out of the cake mould, I'd rather it didn't. I wanted to kind of keep that bond so that my resin didn't leak through. So I left it. I didn't try to see if it would come off. However, I don't know if you can see on your screens, but the silicone did leak under the tape a little bit. You can see it's on the silicone and I didn't want it to be there. And so I was slightly concerned at first, but then I found that if I rubbed it with my finger, it came off. So that was really good. I managed to clean up the mould where it had just seeped under the tape a little bit. When I decided to make mine into a clock, I looked on Amazon for the clock mechanisms. This isn't what I was looking for. I didn't know you could get these. And I came across them and I thought, wow, that's perfect. I love it. It did mean that I would need to form a cylinder of silicone to place on the inside of my cake mould, but I didn't mind too much about that. It was just all part of the adventure. And the great thing about making silicone inserts is they don't have to be permanent. I can put it in there if I'm making a clock, or not put it in there if I want to use this for flower casting, or, you know, casting something else, or even doing like a 3D picture. So yeah, I can use it for all kinds of things and just add silicone inserts if and when I want to. So here I have a template of the inside space which I made, and I just folded it in half twice to find the exact centre. Then I needed to work out how large I wanted my cavity for my clock to be, and I had to think about the fact that you need to be able to get your fingers into the back to take off the back of the clock and change the batteries or change the time. So I didn't want the hole to be exactly the same size as the clock, otherwise I would have never got my fingers in there. So that's all I'm doing here, is working out how large to do it, then marking it and using my compass to draw the circle. Okay, so now I knew what size I wanted my main cavity to be, and I could use that as a template, a background template for my silicone mould that will go on the inside. And so I took a sheet of acetate and put it over the top. Then I took a strip of my Shiny Shield glossy release film and I cut it to 4.5 centimetres in height. That is the exact height I wanted the cavity to be. The actual mould that I'm going to be putting it in is 5 centimetres in height, but I wanted a second mould of 0.5 centimetre just out on the top. You'll see what I mean soon, don't worry. I know it sounds complicated, but it's not. Anyway, I took that strip and I glued it down all the way around, and this time I left the back on to keep it sturdier. Once I'd finished gluing all the way around with my hot melt glue gun, I just sealed the last little bit together with some sticky tape. After that, I needed to repeat the process in exactly the same way, except this time it was going to be the exact, well, about 1 millimetre or 2 millimetres even, larger than the actual size of the clock, which is going to be fitting into the hole, because I needed that first part of the cavity to be the same size as the clock so that it would fit in snugly and not move around. So I'm just drawing around the base of the clock, and then I will make another disc of a silicone disc. That's what I'm going to be making, and this time it's about 0.5 centimetre deep. Like I said before, that it will make sense very soon. Once they were prepared, I mixed up the silicone in exactly the same way as before, except this time I managed to guess the exact amount. Oh, I do love it when that happens. It doesn't happen very often, but sometimes you just guess it and it's exactly right. And I just think that's really good. It's the highlight of my day when that happens. So, yeah, I'm sad, aren't I? Is that sad? Anyway, I was quite excited that I got the exact amount. So once that's poured, after about a day, it would be ready to take out of the mould, and it will look like it's ready. But I highly recommend leaving it for 2 days before you actually use it. I had a bit of a problem with mine. I was too excited to get started and to use it, and because it hadn't fully cured, even though it looked cured and it felt cured, it wasn't actually fully cured, and it started to release a lot of bubbles into my clock, and it did cause me a few problems. So leave it a couple of days before you use it. Right, once they're ready, you can take off the outer casing and they're ready to place into your mould. And the nature of the silicone is it will cling to silicone. And all you have to do is place it onto your silicone mould, and it forms a seal. And yeah, you don't have to attach it with anything. It just forms a seal naturally. So you just pop it on the inside. So I did the big one first and then the smaller one on top. And that template which I made earlier on, I cut the circle out of the middle, the paper template, and I drew around it on the back of my mould and coloured it in with marker pen. So do you see my red mould has got that dark circle in the middle? That's what I drew on the back so that I could place my silicone exactly in the centre, because I didn't want my clock to be off centre. That would have looked really bad. Right, we're ready for the resin, and I wanted to know exactly how much resin I would need. So I put my mould into a big baking tray and I poured in water, and then once I'd poured the water right to the top, I could pour it back into an empty jug to see exactly how much water it was, so I knew the volume of resin, and it was 600 millilitres. Next, you need to make sure everything's completely dry and mix up your resin. I used iCrystal 5, which has a maximum depth of 5 centimetres, so it's perfect for this job. And I added some black pigment paste. It's the Colour Fun pigment paste. The resin and pigment are from Resin Pro. I will leave the links in the description. So yeah, I mixed it all up, and I decided to keep it nice and simple for this one, and obviously I've done it black. But use your imagination. You could do all kinds of things. You could even cast flowers into your clock. It would look so pretty like that. But I thought this was quite a traditional style of mantle clock, and I did think that the black would just look really smart and classy. So that's what I did. I mixed it all in and poured it in, and it's as simple as that. As I mentioned before, I mixed up too much resin. Even though I'd taken all those preparations to get the right amount, I still managed to go over, because this resin is measured by weight, not volume, and it's not a 1-to-1 ratio either. So even though I knew I needed 600 millilitres, when it's not a 1-to-1 ratio and you're measuring by weight, it's not so simple, but I did try my best. Anyway, because I had that left over, I took a lovely pot mould that I've got and I just poured the excess into there. So I ended up with a nice black pot as well. 24 hours later, it was ready to demold. And do you remember me telling you about the problem I had by using those circles of silicone too soon? Well, what happened the night before, after I'd poured all the resin, was all these bubbles kept coming to the top, and it was all coming from that silicone in the middle. And I kept on heating, using my torch to burst the bubbles, and I ended up damaging the surface of my clock with my torch from, using it too much. But it didn't matter, because I knew I was going to do a top coat anyway, and that would hide it. But that's why I was saying, leave your silicone to cure for 2 days. Don't use it straight away after 1 day like I did. Anyway, it came out of the mould really easily. The inside bit was probably the trickiest bit to get out, and I ended up pushing it out. And pushing it from one side and then pulling it from the other, and then it came out easily. Some resin had just seeped under the insert just a little bit at the bottom, and so I'm just using my craft knife to just trim off any little messy bits around the edge, and then I can use my nail file as well just to smooth it down, because you don't want any sharp bits when you're putting your hand in there to change the time or change the batteries. I used a Pilot gold marker pen just to go around the edge and give it a little bit of interest. And then once I'd done that, it was ready for that top coat, just to really tidy it up and, get rid of that mess that I made through my own impatience. For my top coat, I used Art Pro Deluxe from Resin Pro. It's really good for coating things because it's so durable and you get a lovely clear finish as well. And also, it's a really thick resin, this one, and it's so good for top coats because it doesn't go all over the place. You can control it a lot better because of that thickness. So I just roughly poured it around and then teased it to the edge with my stirring knife, and that was it really, and just popped the bubbles with my torch and left it to cure. Before I assembled the clock, I used my epoxy polish from Resin Pro, and I did squirt out a little bit too much, but yeah, I used that and I gave it a really good polish so it was at its best before I put it all together. And then it was just a case of slotting the clock into the hole, putting on the back piece, because I'd already got the time set. So you put on the back piece and then it's got like a little rubber ring that goes around it to keep it into position, and it was finished. You might have noticed some imperfections on the sides. That black shows everything up, so it's really easy for you to see. And I think that was from me pulling the mould back a little bit to see if it was cured when it wasn't fully cured, and it ended up leaving that mark. So I need to learn some patience, really. Here we have it all finished and in position on my cabinet in my living room, and I think it looks brilliant. I think it's got a real classic look about it. And now that I've got this mould, I can try out all different methods and all different styles, because the clock comes in different styles too. You can get it with numbers instead of the Roman numerals for a more modern look. I'm quite fancying the idea of putting dried flowers in there, so I might make a flower clock. Well, we've come to the end of the video now, and I hope you found it really inspiring. I'd love to see what you create using this idea. So don't forget, I am on Instagram, and you can tag me in your Instagram post if you make something using this method, and I'd love to go and have a look. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already done so, if you liked what you saw, and I will see you again next time. Bye for now.